I'm a 19-year-old student. I live in Ascot Vale, a relatively safe suburb in the city of Melbourne, Australia. About 2 months ago, I went through what was perhaps the most frightening experience in my entire life. What makes it even worse for me is that I could have easily prevented it, but due to my fear and confusion, I put it off. Please note, this is still under investigation as the local police have yet to capture this man. It was Friday, the 21st of August, 2015. I had just come home from university, which was around 8:30 p.m., and I thought I'd take a nap. Fast forward 3 hours, I was awoken to a loud banging on my door. I was completely exhausted and stupidly opened the door thinking it was my sister coming back from the pub. Instead, I was greeted by a ghastly figure, definitely mid-40s, maybe early 50s, and he asked me if I knew where I can find a specific address, which happened to be the address of the soon-to-be victim of this man. I knew where it was literally 7 houses down the road. But the man, through my complete exhaustion, was absolutely suspicious. He reeked of alcohol and was clenching his fists in his pocket holding onto something, which later turned out to be a knife. I told him that I was new to the area and I didn't know where it was, and after an angry and frustrated look from him, he took off back into the night. I slumped back into my bed and fell asleep instantly. I awoke at 1 a.m. to the door knocking again, only to realize it was my sister. She told me something that made my stomach drop. She said that the man had been pacing up and down the street and asked her and her friends for directions to a specific house, which my sister, of course, led him to. It was the small unit which the victim lived at. In the early morning of 4 to 5:30 a.m., I could hear men shouting loudly, like extremely loudly, and my instinct told me it was that homeless-looking man confronting the victim, but I hesitated and didn't even bother to call the police, thinking it was just an argument, which was normal around Melbourne. I live with regret to this day when I found out that the victim was viciously stabbed to death and dumped outside his apartment only for the police to discover an hour later. The homeless-looking man disappeared without a trace. I gave the police my description of him, but through my exhaustion I wasn't 100% sure. What I was sure of, though, is that I could have stopped a murder that night, and I now have to live with the guilt of that man's life. This was my only bump-in with the murderer, but I really hope it stays that way. My second year of college was a difficult year. I wish I could say that it was due to organic chemistry or boyfriend drama or anything other than what actually happened. I started out my year in a great dorm. I loved my hallmates, my room, and the fact that a dining hall was less than 100 feet away. Obviously, I spent a lot of my time there, and I got to know the staff. I had worked in a restaurant for 2 years before going to school, and I could identify with the struggles that come with being a food service worker, especially because I was at a notoriously snobby school, so I sympathized with the staff having to deal with the rich kids and their entitled bullshit. Most of the staff were lovely people, but one in particular seemed to take a real interest in me. He was a young white man, not much older than myself, named Matt. He always went out of his way to talk to me and ask me questions about myself and how school was going. One evening, I was doing homework in the dining hall around closing hours. Matt sat with me and we chatted for a bit. He said he was off of work and heading to his car to smoke a bowl before he went home and asked if I wanted to join. I had only smoked a few times before, but I enjoyed it and he seemed harmless enough, so I agreed. I was still very much a sheltered child, and to me, he didn't seem like a bad guy, so he couldn't be. We lit up in his car in the parking lot behind the dining hall, and I got a glimpse of the real Matt. He ranted about how his ex-girlfriend had recently dumped him. He called her a bitch and a whore and told me unnecessary details about their sex life. The virgin in me was incredibly uncomfortable, only made worse by the paranoia brought on by the weed. He also went on about how much he hated the students at my university, especially the girls, saying they treated him as less than human. I was completely speechless, and when I didn't respond, he tried to apologize for going off, saying that I was different and that he wanted to get to know me better. I remember blurting out that I needed to go, and I got the hell out of his car. He got out too and shouted after me to come back, and I thought he might chase me, but he didn't, and I got back to my room safely. I avoided that dining hall like the plague for the next week, and I didn't see him again until the one night that still haunts me to this day. Around midnight, I was walking back to my dorm alone from a function at the Christian Center, which was only about 2 blocks away. I know walking by myself was stupid, but the buses weren't running and I felt bad asking someone to walk with me because there were some steep inclines between the center and my dorm. I was walking along an empty residential street that was just around the corner from my dorm when I noticed a black SUV that was creeping along behind me. It was going so slow that it was hard not to notice. At first I tried not to panic, but it quickly clicked that it was the same car as Matt's. I started to run when it sped up ahead of me and a man in a ski mask jumped out at me. I just knew it was Matt. From here, things happened very fast. I tried to run the other way, but he grabbed me from behind and was struggling to get my wrists into handcuffs while simultaneously pulling me toward his car. I was screaming at the top of my lungs and fighting like hell. We fought each other for a few minutes like that before he dropped the handcuffs and I was able to slam my heel into his foot. I think those two things and my relentless struggling shook his confidence because he ran back to his car and sped off. Freaked out, I ran back to my room, constantly looking back to see if he was after me. Thankfully, he didn't follow and I was able to call the police. I was very lucky that night, not only because I got away, but also because he was caught shortly after I called 911. He was arrested, and when the police searched his car, they found handcuffs, duct tape, and a knife. During interrogation, he confessed that he was bitter and depressed over his breakup and wanted to make someone, quote, feel pain like he feels it. Nearly a year later, after a painful testimony from me, he was convicted to 40 years in prison with a 32-year suspension for abduction and intent to defile. I'm not entirely sure how to start this story. You sit there listening to these stories on YouTube, fascinated, thinking that it will never happen to you, and for a long time you live in the sweet ignorance that everyone loves you and no one is out to hurt you. Until someone actually tries to. Here is some background information. I'm a 20-year-old 5-foot Hispanic female, and this happened, well, started happening a few months ago. I'm not an active person, but every once in a while I like to go for a run. The neighborhood I live in is a gated community. The only downside is that just outside my neighborhood is a major highway that runs out of my town and into the barren plains of Texas. This highway separates my neighborhood from a few local stores. One day I decided to run as I usually did every Monday and Wednesday. I run about 3 miles safely across the highway and through a rough neighborhood before I reached the store I wanted. I walked through the aisle, wiping the sweat from my forehead, and grabbed a water bottle. That's when I noticed a man maybe a few years older than me staring at me from the end of the aisle. Awkwardly, I gave him a small smile and walked to the register to pay. In the corner of my eye, I could see him follow me. I felt his gaze on my back as I left the store and placed the bottle of water in my small backpack that carried my wallet and pocket knife. As I ran through the rough neighborhood, a white car going the opposite direction passed me. I didn't notice it till it stopped in reverse till I was parallel to the driver who lowered his window. It was the man from the store. "Need a ride?" he asked, flashing me a wide grin. "Oh no, thank you." I slowed my run to a walk as I spoke. "Aw, come on, you look tired," he smirked, still reversing to match my speed. I laughed and shook my head. "I'm running, you'll ruin my workout," I said jokingly. He seemed to get angry at this and raised his window before driving off. Fast forward a bit later. I waited for the cross light to turn green so I could cross the highway when I saw the same white car driving past me. It was blasting rap music, but this time all the windows were lowered. Now 3 men could be seen in the back seat. I didn't think much of it as I crossed the highway. The next few days I began to see the man around my job. I work at a pet store in the fish area, and I could see this man just wander around the store, never really buying anything. One day he struck up a conversation with me. He asked my name, age, if I had a boyfriend, which I did. I answered truthfully, treating him as I would any customer. His name was John, he was 22, and he said he went to UNT. He looked annoyed when I said I had a boyfriend and couldn't go out to lunch with him. He quickly left, but not before saying, "Oh, by the way, nice Kia." Now, this struck me as odd. How did he know what car I drove? A few days later, I hadn't seen the man and honestly forgot about the whole thing. Until one morning I went outside and saw that someone had wrecked my car. My car had a huge dent in the back passenger side, my bumper was on the ground, and my brake light was smashed. The police called it a hit and run and scolded me for parking so close to the street. Okay, but I live in a cul-de-sac. How does someone run into a car when the street is a huge circle? Anyway, after a few carless days, I walk out to go check the mail. At the end of my street, I see a white car with the front bumper smashed in. My only regret is not telling anyone what was happening. A month went by and I finally had my car back. The first place I took it was my boyfriend's house. I spent 8 hours with him before I left his house at about 12:30 p.m. Driving down the highway, it takes about 15 minutes to get from his house to mine. About 5 minutes into the drive, I noticed a car tailgating me. Its headlights weren't even on. I quickly call my boyfriend, who tells me to drive between the other cars. I do so. The car stays steady on my heels. I speed up. The car speeds up. It wasn't until I passed a police car did the car following me finally back off. Needless to say, I didn't get that much sleep that night. The next night I was closing at my job, and part of my job was taking the trash to the dumpster in the back. Usually the dog trainer, Joe, joins me. He's this huge man, about 50, with a loud voice. I felt safe around Joe. Everyone did. But today Joe wasn't feeling well, so I took out the trash by myself. I walked out the back of the store and walked towards the fenced-off dumpster. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. The white car was parked a few feet away, and I saw the door of the fence close quickly. Now, this could have been the wind. Maybe the morning shift forgot to lock the gate and the wind was just blowing it. I'm not sure, but something in my gut told me to not go near the dumpster. I quickly dropped the trash and walked back inside the store. I told my manager and Joe what had happened. My manager just rolled his eyes and said it must have been a bum trying to get the cans of cat food we threw out. Being used to kicking out homeless people, he walked to the dumpster and opened the gate. After a few minutes, my manager walked back into the store, a grim look on his face. He ordered Joe to walk me to my car. It wasn't until later that week that I had heard what my manager actually found. A man in his mid-20s hiding behind the dumpster. My manager scared him off, but what he left behind will haunt me to this day. Where he stood was a pocket knife and a few zip ties. What made things worse was when the man took off, the white car started and he got into the passenger side. I'm terrified. I've alerted the police, and since then I've not seen the man or the white car. But since then, my boyfriend escorts me to and from work. I no longer run, and I carry a small taser on me at all times now. I'm still struggling to get my life back. Maybe telling my story will help. To everyone out there, please tell someone if something doesn't feel right. When I was 11, I moved to a rather big city due to my dad getting transferred at his work. Before that, I lived in a relatively small town known for practically nothing. I loved that town with all my heart, and I still love it even today, but this experience shattered my little kid illusion that it was safe and nothing bad could ever happen to anyone. I lived in a very close-knit neighborhood where all the parents knew each other and all of the kids were friends. At the end of my street was a small, half-built house that became sort of the neighborhood hangout for everyone. It had been abandoned during its construction for unknown reasons, and it sat there for nearly 2 years before we all decided it was the perfect clubhouse. All of the kids would walk home from school together, stop in to tell their parents where they were going, and then head down to the house. One Saturday, I went across the street to my friend's house and asked if she wanted to go to the clubhouse with me. She said she was eating lunch, but that she'd meet me there as soon as she was done. I was only 7 at the time, but my parents trusted me enough not to get into any trouble or run off somewhere, so I headed down to the house to wait. I was sitting on the front steps of the house when a white car with very darkly tinted windows pulled up to the curb. To my young mind, it looked exactly like a police car, just without the lights on top of it, so I thought they were undercover or something. I was 7, cut me some slack. The driver of the car rolled down the passenger window and leaned over the seat, and I could see he was wearing a police officer's uniform and aviator sunglasses. He waved me over, and not wanting to make the cop angry, I approached the passenger side of the car. "Hey there, do you think you could help me with something?" he asked me. He seemed nice enough, so I told him that I'd try. He went on to show me a picture of a little girl I'd never seen before and asked if I knew her. I shook my head, and he told me that she was missing and that her parents really wanted her back, but he was having trouble finding her. At that point, my friend from earlier, Anna, had showed up. The guy asked Anna if she had seen the little girl, but she hadn't seen her either. He then seemed to get really sad and shook his head and said, "I just really wish I could find her. Do you two want to help me look? If you can get in my car, we can drive around and see if we can find her." To me, that sounded awesome, and I threw all notions of stranger danger out the window. I'd never been in a police car before and thought I'd have the time of my life, but Anna seemed to have her head on right that day and politely declined. This visibly upset the guy, and he got really angry, telling us he'd arrest us if we didn't get in the car and help him. Anna and I both started freaking out, and we booked it to my house when the guy reached into his glove box and pulled out a set of handcuffs. He sped off as soon as we started running. At that point, we were both crying, but we managed to get to my house and tell my mom what had happened. She immediately called the police and asked if they had an officer patrolling in our neighborhood, but of course they didn't. So the real cops showed up to my house and asked me and Anna a ton of questions, and I realized that the scary guy's police uniform was way off. They tried to get a description from us, but he was wearing a hat and sunglasses that blocked most of his face, so it didn't really amount to much. We were, however, able to provide a description of the little girl in the picture. As far as I know, nothing happened with the guy. I've tried searching for any news articles, but I haven't found anything. The description we gave of the little girl didn't match any missing people within a 100-mile radius of our town, so nothing really came of that either. After that, none of the kids in my neighborhood were allowed to go to the clubhouse or be outside without at least one parent supervising us. This happened to me about 2 years ago when I was on a cross-country road trip with my good friend Kim. We started in the Northwest and our final destination was in Georgia. We were trying to make this trip as quickly as possible, and since it was just the two of us, we took turns driving and sleeping. We had just passed through Laramie, Wyoming, where I got pulled over for speeding. It wasn't by much, only 10 miles over the speed limit. I apologized to the police officer and he kindly let us off the hook since our car had no cruise control and we had a long way to go ahead. After leaving Laramie, we didn't stop for a long time and the highway rarely cut through any towns. It was probably 3, maybe 4 in the morning and the highway was deserted. Tall pine trees lined the 2-lane blacktop and jagged mountains covered our surroundings. Kim was sleeping heavily, her chair reclined all the way down, a blanket thrown over her head. I had the radio on, but she was exhausted, so she didn't even move or notice. I was trying to concentrate on the road and the quiet music on the radio to stay awake. Visibility was very limited, as there were no lights on this road. Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed in my rearview mirror. I hastily looked at my speedometer, but I was diligently following the speed limit after the narrow escape from the ticket earlier. I pulled over, killed my engine, and rolled down my window. The cop car behind me appeared to be an unmarked vehicle, but it was hard to tell because it was so dark. Kim didn't even move as the police officer approached my window. "Ma'am," he said, "do you know why I pulled you over today?" No, officer, I don't." His flashlight was pointed directly at my face, and I had to avert my eyes. "Your plates sure are from far away. Where are you headed?" The police officer in Laramie had asked me the same thing. "Georgia. Family emergency." "Is that so? Well, you weren't in any shape to make it to Georgia from Nebraska. No siree." I frowned. Was my car breaking down? Were my taillights out? In my tired haze, had I missed something vital? I'm sorry, what's wrong?" "Here, step out of the car, I'll show you." He gestured with his flashlight and the beam slanted across Kim's blanket-shrouded face and she sat up. She yawned. "What's going on?" The police officer abruptly turned, walked away, and got into his car. He flipped a U-turn and sped off in the opposite direction down the highway. Kim and I stared at each other for a moment before I started the car, rolled up the window, and sped off with no regard for the speed limit this time. A while back, when I lived in a small town with long, winding stretches of road between my house and my workplace, I had a rather unsettling run-in with a police officer. I worked the night shift, so it was about 11 p.m. It was Saturday, and I had just set out towards the hotel I worked at. I have a GPS system that logs a high amount of information, so I know that I wasn't speeding. After driving for about a mile, I noticed a car starts following me very closely. After a couple of miles of this, I've decided I've had enough, so I switch lanes in front of a few other cars and keep driving. Predictably, this person, it was too dark to see anything but their headlights as there were few street lights in this remote area, weaves in and out of cars to get right back behind me. Finally, after being tailgated for about 13 miles, I get to a lone stretch of road and the speed limit increases to 55 miles per hour. I gladly take the opportunity to go faster once I pass the sign, and admittedly, I did get up to 57 miles per hour as this person continued to tailgate me. And he turns his lights on. I'm already nervous as the road is dark and it's late, but there are just enough cars going by for me to reason with myself to pull over. And then the cop turns his lights off, which I'm quite certain they're not supposed to do. He approaches my window and chides me for speeding, saying he saw me going 70 in a 30-mile-per-hour zone on the street he initially started following me on. I tell him my GPS log can say otherwise, and I bluffed a bit, stupid, I know, saying that I had a device from my insurance company that also tracks my driving. He claims he saw me weaving all over the road and assumed I was drunk, and I questioned why, if I was speeding so seriously and driving so poorly, he followed me for 13 miles, passing said obvious drunk drivers and people speeding past us to do so, instead of pulling me over immediately. Completely ignoring my question, the cop glances down and says my car is going to cause the grass I'm parked on to catch fire. Now, you're probably thinking what I'm thinking. What the fuck? That makes no sense. And then he asked me to pull into an empty lot on top of a nearby hill. A lot that was completely impossible to see from the road. Nervous, I act as if I'm going to, and accidentally, not really, pass it only to pull into a residential parking lot with all the lights on. The cop gets out, obviously angry, and demands to see my license and registration. I turned it in and he gets in his car for just a few minutes, during which I quite obviously get my phone out and tell my coworkers what's going on. He then gets out of the car, returns my information claiming he let me off with a warning, and drives off quickly. He returned my registration but kept my license, and the slip had a bunch of scribbles on it in place of any real words. The next day I called the station looking for my license, and of course, he hadn't turned it in. I told them what had happened and gave them some information that they asked for, including some numbers on the ticket that I could read, and they said they'd look into it. The next few days, I did see a cop car on the roads near my house, but I wrote it off as noticing something normal out of paranoia. My father thought I was being ridiculous, which upset me quite a bit as I still had, and have, that fake ticket. Luckily, I'd been planning a move and moved out of state just a week or so later, but I hope that my complaint was looked into and that man didn't do anything wrong to anyone else. I don't know if he was a real cop or a fake cop, but nonetheless, the experience was definitely scary. Hey everyone, before I start the video I want to thank Lazy Masquerade for collaborating with me on this video. When I first started he was one of the bigger guys in the scary storytelling community and he still is, so it's awesome to finally be able to work with him. If you haven't heard of him, make sure you go check out his channel, he provides really unique and amazing material. Also, make sure you check out the collaboration video we did on his channel for more of these kinds of stories. I'll leave an annotation at the end of this video and a link in the description. Now, on to the stories. This happened to me just a few weeks ago. My parents had gone out of town and left me at home. It was fine for the first few days, playing games, watching TV, you know, normal teen stuff. One day I'm sitting in my room around 7 at night when I hear someone knocking at my door. Normally, my grandmother, who lives just down the road, will come over and check up on me and say goodnight and all that stuff. So, thinking it's her, I go up to let her in. I open my main door and see not my grandmother, but a man. He looked mid-30s and was kinda chubby. He held a clipboard and just stared at me till I said something to him. Hello? I ask in a weirded out voice. Hi, I'm from the furnace company and I'm here to check your furnace. As he said this, he tried forcing me away to let him in. I kept my ground and held him back. My parents aren't here right now, can you come back later? His eyes lightened up when he found out I was home alone. Just, let me check, okay? I gotta make sure it's all fired up. That's when I checked the van he had. It was an unmarked green van. Normally all companies in my town have a logo, and I mean all of them. I'm not letting you in. My yell somewhat startled him as he stepped back and I was able to get in and lock the outer door, keeping him out. I grabbed my cell phone and called my grandmother and told her what happened. As I told her, the guy ran back to the van and sped off. I'm horrified to think of what would have happened if I never scared him away. Number 2.
I used to live in a really weird area of town, so I have a lot of these kind of experiences. The first one happened when I was in 6th grade. It was in late fall, and I had joined some after-school activities at the new school to make friends. Problem was that I had nobody to pick me up afterwards. I was stuck, walking, and the road home was a long maze of abandoned houses with boarded windows. One of these times, I saw a red car inching behind me, the only car on an otherwise quiet street. The driver was an older, chubby man with a huge smile. He rolls down his window. "Hi, you look like you need a ride." I smiled at him and I said no thanks. He kept following. "Don't be shy. Come on, slow down." I told him I was fine, while looking around to see if anyone else was nearby to see this. He responded with something like, "You still have a long way to go until you get home." I felt a chill of horror as I realized I was alone. How did this man even know where I was going? I started running a bit, and the car kept following me. I could hear him saying things like, "Stop running, don't be scared." He drove up and parked at the end of the road we were on. Adrenaline kicked in, and I ran like my life depended on it. I reached the main roads, and I didn't see the car anymore, but I was terrified he would follow me home somehow, so I hid, and I waited a few minutes. I finally arrived home, shaky from adrenaline and crying. My parents thought that I was lying to get out of trouble, and told me to just take the city bus next time. Needless to say, after that experience, I never walked to school and back again.
Number 3. So, this happened to me today while I was walking up the hill to the park. It was broad daylight with a few construction workers and gardeners around. I stopped to admire the view of the canyon on the sidewalk off of a very busy street. A dark, greenish, gray old Toyota truck drove past me going the opposite way. I turned around when I heard the car brake and make a very sharp illegal U-turn. I watched the truck pull up right beside me. A white man in his 50s with white hair, a white shirt, and a German Shepherd in the passenger seat was inside. The man leaned over and held his hand out of the window towards me. He held out 2 pieces of paper with rainbow-colored stripes and funky white text that said, "Fun Pass," on them. He whistled at me, grinned, and said, "Come here, these are for you." I shook my head and scowled. "Come here," he repeated, and he reached for his glove compartment with the other hand. He looked to be in a hurry, trying to make his encounter with me as brief as possible. Of course, because a man with sick motives wouldn't want to be seen for long. I shook my head again and began backing up, thinking of the other kidnappings in my city in which a guy pulled out a gun once they got close to the car and threatened the girls to get in or he'd shoot them. This was quite possibly the same scenario. My heart raced and I gripped my phone, preparing myself to run and scream for help. The man had an immediate change of plan, as though he realized I knew his intentions. He cursed to himself and hit the gas, doing another U-turn and speeding down the street. I only managed to get a few numbers of the plate, but I called the cops and gave them a description. Number 4.
In grade 5, a friend of mine, Chloe, was messaged on MySpace by our mutual friend, Asher. Asher asked Chloe to meet at the park by Chloe's house. Chloe had baseball practice, so she told her maybe another day. Asher insisted that today was best, and she really wanted to hang out, even if it was only for 10 minutes. Chloe told her no again, since she was about to eat dinner and then leave. Chloe thought it was strange that Asher was so persistent, as they had never hung out at school, let alone afterwards. The next day, Chloe confronted Asher. "Sorry I couldn't hang out yesterday. I had baseball practice. I'm free tonight if you want." Asher was confused. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "On MySpace. You asked me to hang out last night." Asher then explained that she didn't message Chloe. Creepier yet, she had recently gotten a new account due to spam she was receiving. The scariest part to me is that whoever was sending the messages had referred to the park by its name, which isn't a very common one. A couple of years later, my other friends saw a green van parked on the street the park was on, with a middle-aged man inside that only showed up during soccer games or when there was a lot of kids around, and would leave when the kids left. My friend lived across the street from the park and noticed this from her window frequently. Chloe deleted her MySpace account when she got home.
Number 5. I was 11 years old. I spent the night hanging out with my closest friend at the time. I left around 7 o'clock. She was about a 15 to 20 minute walk away from my house. It was the month of December, so it was icy and dark outside. While I was walking down the long sidewalk, I had to make a turn halfway. Across the turn down the sidewalk, I noticed a man way further down. He was alone at the moment. 10 seconds later, a 4-door car drove up to him. It was a long street till my turn, so I watched him talk to whoever was in the car. It sped off and he just stopped, watching me walk. As I kept walking, all I heard was someone shouting at me, "Hey you, come here." I freaked the fuck out. I started walking faster and then noticed he started running towards me. I started running for my life. Since the ground was covered in snow and ice, all I literally thought as I was running was, "Please God, don't let me slip. Mom, please help me." I was crying as I was running. He caught up extremely fast. I kept looking back and noticed the car slowly driving behind him. As I ran, I felt his arm reach out and try to grab the hood of my sweatshirt. By God's grace, his hand slipped, and I ran a block trying to find a house with its lights on. I finally found one and banged at the door, almost ready to break it down to get in. This older couple finally answered. I ran inside explaining what happened. The husband then went outside to try to find them, and when we went out, he saw the man standing at the end of the street just staring at him, and then he ran off. My mom called the cops and pulled me out of school for 4 days afterwards. The guy was never found. For a while afterward, I would buy flowers and a card and leave it on the couple's doorstep, thanking them for saving my life. God only knows what would have happened if he got me and dragged me to the car. Number 6.
Just to give you some background information, I'm a 29-year-old female, and this happened to me 4 years ago. My family lived on a farm in rural outback Western Australia, just north of Geraldton, in a modest-looking wooden farmhouse. My son and I lived here alone most of the time, while my husband worked on rotation up north on the mines. We had no neighbours, no mobile phone reception, and very little connection with the outside world, with the exception of the television. There was only one window in the house, situated above my bed in the bedroom. It was a small old wooden framed window with no curtains. However, the window was completely jammed, and as much as I tried to close it, there was about 2 inches of opening near the bottom of the window frame. My husband and I had spent a while trying to oil the hinges and loosen it up the day before he left to go to work again, but we gave up as it wasn't a huge issue at the time. Fast forward to a couple of nights later. I'm standing in front of the TV, doing the ironing and watching Sex and the City reruns, while my son is asleep in my bed. As I walk up the hallway to enter the laundry to grab another load of washing, I pass my bedroom and I pop my head in to check on my son. My heart stops. The window frame above my bed is shuffling from side to side. My eyes scan down, and what I see next will never leave my mind again. There were two hands squeezing through the gap of the window, trying to lift up the jammed frame. I screamed the house down, grabbed my son, the phone, and locked myself in the bathroom and called the police. I'd hate to think what would have happened if I hadn't been walking past my bedroom at that exact moment. We've since moved from this house not long after this incident occurred. We fixed the window straight away, but I could never seem to shake the feeling off that someone was watching me while I slept, so we packed up ship and moved to Perth for our new life.
Number 7. To give a little context for this story, I was right around 15 and living at my dad's house when this happened. We lived in a quiet neighborhood up in the hills. On the night of this occurrence, it was around midnight. I had just gotten home from a babysitting job for a neighbor that was about 10 minutes away walking distance. On my way home, I hadn't heard anyone except a couple owls. I walked into the house, locked the door, and went downstairs to see if my sister was awake. As I got to the bottom of the stairs, the doorbell rang. I thought, maybe I left something at the house I was at, so quickly I ran back up the stairs. When I answered the door, I was greeted by a man covered in blood. He honestly looked like a zombie in my 15-year-old perspective. His jaw was hanging limp and he was missing at least 7 teeth. His head looked concaved in several spots and one of his eyes was missing. He may have been beaten with a baseball bat. I stepped back in shock as he sputtered the word, "Help," and collapsed on our porch. I ran into my dad's room shaking and told him what happened. He shot upward, called 911 and went to help. By this point, my little brother, who's 6 years old, had woken up and was trying to find out what was going on. I rushed to get them back into the room and get my dad the supplies he needed until the ambulance arrived. Unfortunately, the man was too injured to tell anyone what happened, but he just kept pointing to the top of the next hill. The ambulance took him to the hospital. The man died, John Doe, in the hospital 2 days later. Number 8.
When I was about 4 or 5, I went grocery shopping with my grandma. I noticed she kept looking behind her and would inexplicably grab my hand and cart me along quickly for what seemed like no reason at all. I didn't question it though. I was just happy to be getting out of there sooner. Around this time, my uncle had recently headed out to fight in Desert Storm. My grandma was behind a display and talking about him. I wandered off to play near a basket of toys or something. Being young and not really understanding where he had gone, I said something along the lines of, "Where's Uncle Mike? I miss Uncle Mike." An older guy with crazy, grey, dark brown hair quickly made his way over to me and bent down to my level. "Are you alone? You know, I have an Uncle Mike as well. Let's go find him." He grabbed my arm and was about to pick me up. My grandma, thank God, was only 2 feet away, but was hidden by the display. She jumped when she heard him speak and immediately scooped me up and away from him.
Number 9. Back in my late teenage years, around junior and senior years of high school, my friends and I enjoyed messing around with people a bit too much. Since we were, quote, fearless teenagers, we decided to use one of our ghillie suits for ding-dong ditching. The way that ghillie suit ding-dong ditching works is someone wearing a ghillie suit would knock on a door and try to hide in plain sight by hiding near plants and stuff like that. And if you don't know what a ghillie suit is, it's just a suit that looks like a bush. Anyways, on to the rest of the story. The night started well as we had done a few houses without any notable incidents. It was finally my turn to wear the ghillie suit, and I chose a seemingly harmless and easy house. So my friends got into position to watch behind a fairly large hidden rock, and I hid in the garden right in front of the house. and the house looked kind of fancy, so I assumed the people that lived there were just passive old people. So I knocked on the door and got in my hiding spot and waited for someone to answer the door. After about a minute, I heard the door open and someone started walking around looking for whoever knocked on their door. Now, this made me nervous, but I wasn't necessarily scared yet, until my dumbass friend peeked his head out too far and the guy saw him. He yelled for his buddies to get the gun and started running towards my friends and shooting in their direction. Now, at this point, I'm almost shitting myself because this guy was obviously fucking insane and I couldn't just stand up because he'd probably think I was just a robber or something. So I waited and waited and waited until finally the guy came back and said, "I think I scared him away," and walked back into his house along with his buddy. I waited 10 seconds, then ran like hell all the way back to the corner, took off my ghillie suit and called for my friends. Thankfully, they were fine, but that redneck guy was crazy as fuck. Number 10.
Please note, I'm a 13-year-old female. This happened about 1 week ago. My mum and I went to our local craft store, Michael's, to buy home decor and stuff I needed for a project. My mother trusts me greatly, so she allowed me to go and get what I needed, expecting me to eventually find her somewhere else in the giant store. I needed some felt, so I went to go and get it. That's when the guy walked into the store. He looked stoned as fuck. His beard was matted and greasy, and he was bald. He looked to be between 40 and 50 years old. When I walked past him, my nostrils were met with the single most disgusting smell ever. I tried to get away as fast as possible. Now I was far away enough, and on the aisle that had the stuff I needed. My arms are full of felt, buttons, and styrofoam as I went out to find my mother. I got out of the aisle, and it's that fucking smell again. The guy was standing right behind me. I walked away as fast as I could. I found my mum by the fall decorations, and I put my stuff in the cart. For the next half hour, I helped her pick out certain decorations for our house, all the while feeling like I was being watched. A few minutes after, I told my mum I have to go to the bathroom. I asked an employee, and they say it's in the back right corner. Bad feelings overwhelmed me every step closer. The hallway into the bathroom area was dim. I walked into the ladies' room and went into a stall. The door opened. That smell. Oh fuck, I whispered to myself. Hey kid, wanna come home with me? I pretended like I wasn't there. I hear in the background someone telling the man to get out of the woman's restroom. After, I found my mum, paid for the stuff, and got the fuck into the car. I still haven't told her yet. Only my friends at school.
I want to start out by saying that this story is 100% true. I know people will say that to add immersion, but it really is, and this is the only place I know where to post it at. Do I believe everything that happened actually happened? Not necessarily. I'm as skeptical as you will be, and I welcome any explanation as to how the events that occurred were not supernatural. It could have been an elaborate prank on behalf of my friends, but there are several reasons why I find that hard to believe. Mass hysteria, maybe. Who knows? Anyway, here's the story. I enlisted in the Army in 2009 and had my AIT, Advanced Individual Training, in Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Pretty much any soldier stationed at Fort Huachuca, often named Fort We Gotcha, has above average intelligence. Most of the MOSs require a very high ASVAB score. Needless to say, the friends I made were a unique bunch, many of us gaming nerds. Huachuca is about 20 minutes from the Mexican border and about 40 minutes from the infamous Tombstone, Arizona. One day, we were bored and swapping ghost stories. One of my buddies bought a Ouija board at Walmart for us to play around with. We'll call him Jackson to protect his identity. I'm not sure Jackson believed in the supernatural, but when your disposable income to free time ratio is skewed horribly in the wrong direction, you buy stupid shit to entertain yourself with. Jackson and I attempted to use the Ouija board in our barracks as the base is extremely old and ripe with hauntings. Unfortunately, the barracks we had recently moved to were brand new, so the Ouija board didn't work. Tired of strip clubs and flirting with the Mexican border, we hungered for a unique adventure. I brought up the idea of traveling to nearby Tombstone, Arizona. Jackson lit up when I mentioned this, as he had just heard a story of a haunted house in Tombstone he wanted to check out. We came to a quick ghost hunting consensus and invited our buddy Thompson along for the ride. We arrived at Tombstone shortly after dark. It was not quite how I expected it. I had pictured a literal ghost town with a few dilapidated Wild West buildings and the obligatory tumbleweed blowing through the street. This was not the case at all. Even at night, it's basically a normal town with a few historical buildings and tourist traps. In addition to the downtown stretch, they have a residential area just like any other small town in America. It was in this residential area that we began hunting for the supposed haunted house. We got to the area we thought it was in, but weren't sure which house it was. After a few minutes of circling the block, the group decided to take a break to piss. Everyone went a separate direction to pee, but I could not find a place private enough, so I didn't go. I was the second person back in the car. I climbed into the back seat and asked Jackson, "Where's Thompson?" "I don't know, he's been gone for a while. I'll text him," said Jackson. All of a sudden, Thompson, looking whiter than he normally does, comes sprinting towards the car and frantically tries to open the passenger door. Jackson calmly unlocks the door and lets him in and asks, "What happened?" "Dude, you're not gonna believe this shit," Thompson gasped. His southern drawl tightened like a cello string. "I was in this house that looked abandoned, right? So I go in and look around and decide to have a smoke. I look down at my phone to text you guys and tell you about it, and all of a sudden, something touched my shoulder." "Holy shit, what was it?" I asked. "Nothing. There was nothing there." I sprinted back to the car. Pumped with adrenaline, curiosity, and stupidity, I suggested we go full mystery machine and park in a nearby lot and use the Ouija board from inside the car. As soon as we could get parked, roughly half a block away, we anxiously pulled out the Ouija board and put it in our laps. As the person designated to ask questions, I began. "Is there anyone here?" To my disbelief, the planchette started moving. It slowly but surely moved towards yes. "Were you the thing that touched Thompson?" "Yes," it replied. "Are you the ghost in the haunted house we were going to visit?" "No," it answered. Now this is what took me by surprise. If this was one of the others trying to scare us, why wouldn't they take the obvious bait? Claim to be the ghost we saw and commence scaring the shit out of us. I mean, that's like a Nigerian scammer writing you about your long-lost fortune and then responding no when you ask if he's able to give you $6 million instead of $5.5 million. At this point, I had a flashback of just about every creepy Ouija experience I had ever seen or read about. They always started with some cliche questions like, "LOL, how did you die?" and ended with, "Oh my fucking god," in a flurry of telekinetic activity. I wanted this session to be different. After all, we were a hand-picked bunch of intelligent people, not a group of scared teenagers. If this was real, I wanted this specter to break history with me. So, I took a moment and started thinking. What would I want to know about a ghost? What questions can I ask that aren't cliché? What can I ask that will break the linear decision tree where all Ouija boards end up telling you they want you dead? I realized any questions I asked had to be extremely specific. and offer no chance for creepy deviation in the answer. I suppose I could ask it for the coefficient of pi, and it could just respond with, "Die, bitch," over and over, but I had faith in the ghost. So the first question I asked was, name one thing the building you touched Thompson in was used for. The planchette slowly started moving again. Ha, I thought to myself, this thing can't possibly get creepy from this question. I bet it will say like general store or post office. Slaughter. Slaughter. Pucker Factor 9. Good game, Ghost. Have an upvote, I guess. But seriously, I again realized this was probably not one of us joking around because the term slaughter has not been used since the 1800s. You don't log on to CNN and see, "Man slaughtered today in small house in Arizona. Details at 11. If my friends were pulling a prank, the easiest verb would have been something like murder. Intrigued, I decided to ask it why it touched Thompson. H-E-L-P. Help, it replied. Thinking this would lead somewhere creepy, I asked when it died instead. 1867. I again started thinking of questions I could ask that no one ever thinks to ask a ghost. I remember hearing on some website that you are never supposed to ask a Ouija board about God. So, I did the only logical thing an atheist would do at that point. Why aren't I supposed to ask you about God? No, came a quick, terse reply. So, I tried to be more creative about it. I asked it, if you were playing World of Warcraft, what class would you play? It's gonna say Undead Warlock, I guarantee— No, it snapped again. It was weird. Despite being an entity that couldn't directly talk to us, you could almost sense its tone of voice through how it moved the planchette. I wanted to continue asking it questions, but our first sergeant interrupted the session with a frantic phone call. He ordered all of us back to base for 100% accountability due to someone losing their weapon. Disappointed, we packed up and headed back. The next day we were telling the others in our platoon about our experience the night before. After many bullshit and eye rolls, another soldier named Green showed interest. We decided to try to talk to the ghost again and take Green with us. He had an SUV which would give us more room to set up the board. As a soldier, my first instinct was not only to plan our arrival and departure time, but safety contingencies as well. This was especially on my mind after the previous night. I briefed the group in advance that if anything creepy happened, we were better off with a pre-identified plan on what to do as to take the spirits by surprise. Our ghost hunting SOP was as follows. At approximately 2,000 hours, we will depart for Tombstone. This will allow us to arrive after dark. We will take 2 vehicles, Green's SUV and Jackson's coupe. Jackson and Thompson will ride in the coupe while Green and I will ride in the SUV. We will set up our session in the SUV so as to allow for a quick departure if anything spooky happens. We will leave any weapons or sharp objects back at the base. Spirits can only harm others by proxy. If there are no objects around to throw or possess someone into using, then the only physical danger will be soiling our underwear. In the event of one of us feeling creeped out beyond belief or an impending sense of doom, we will give an obvious signal to the others to quickly pack up and leave. Each soldier will return to the vehicle they traveled in and take off back to the base. Upon leaving this scene, the vehicles will immediately establish contact via cell phone to ensure safety and share in the moment of, holy shit, what the fuck just happened? So, it was settled. We had our plan and were feeling confident. The undead were no match for Arizona's finest soldiers. We parked in the same lot we had the night before and eagerly took out our Ouija board. There were 4 of us now and we were feeling very confident, but I would lie if I told you I wasn't jittery as fuck. Literally everything I knew about life in the universe at this point was challenged by what we had seen the previous night. I felt like the equivalent of someone who discovers a 6-inch tall genie in their closet that only they can talk to. It literally felt surreal, like a movie. Green was especially nervous about being with us as he was raised Catholic. Though he was no longer religious, he still had that strongly ingrained fear of Ouija boards. Green opted to just spectate as we placed the planchette on the board. There were 3 of us controlling it. We started by asking if anyone was there and received a very slow, strained yes. I asked it if it was the same being we talked to the previous night, and it said no. Going off the same theme as last night, I wanted to mindfuck this ghost. I did not want to give it the opportunity to be creepy, and I wanted it to answer questions no one would think to ask. I wanted to expose the ghost's vulnerabilities. As of now, the ghost was this mysterious, all-powerful being. However, as any logical person knows, the paranormal is just science not yet discovered. The ghost must have its limits, I thought. It isn't God and therefore has things it cannot do, things it cannot have. So, I had the bright idea to ask, what is one thing you want that you cannot have? L-I-F-E. Life, it answered. I wasn't sure whether to feel like an ass, an idiot, or both. Before I could decide between shame and stupidity, the interior light in Green's brand new, might I add, SUV flickered. Holy fucking shit. That doesn't just happen. The only time I've ever seen a light flicker in a car was when it was being started. This was getting a little too real. This spirit was alpha, and it was asserting its ethereal dominance. After regaining my composure, I began to brainstorm more questions. You've been asking all the questions, let me give it a try, Thompson contested me. Fine, go ahead, I said. What do you want from us, he asked, in his defiant Georgia accent. S-T-E-V. Dude, there's no fucking way, I thought to myself. My name is Steven and all, but there's no E-N. At this point, I was terrified. No one there knew my first name but Thompson. Also, the planchette was moving in a puppeted fashion, away from Thompson when it spelled it out. The best way I could describe it was like an invisible thread, straight from the front of the car pulling the planchette based on how it twisted and turned. There was no one in the front of the car. Before I could even react, the center console, which was about 5 inches ajar, closed by itself. I calmly invoked our military plan of action. Okay guys, it just spelled out my first fucking name, let's get the fuck out of here. No one said a word or hesitated for a second. Thompson and Jackson scrambled out of the SUV and into Jackson's Eclipse. Green and I piled into the front seat of the SUV. Green immediately shifted to drive and peeled out of the dusty lot. I'm not sure a Ford Escape has ever been used in such a literal fashion. Green was in shock, and so was I. My atheist brain was questioning if God might actually be real, and Green's devout brain was pondering the opposite. Our trance was broken by Green's alternative rock ringtone. It was surreal hearing pop culture in that moment when our brains were so far removed from reality. Green answered the phone. It was Jackson and Thompson. Their car wouldn't start. They had never left Tombstone. Green slams on the brakes and bangs a U-turn that would put Vin Diesel in diapers. He floors the modest SUV. We were going about 100 miles per hour heading down Arizona 82 back towards Tombstone. Dude, slow the fuck down, I yelled. At this point, I was far more afraid of Green's driving than the spirits. They're our fucking friends, we can't just leave them there. We knew the general direction back to Tombstone and arrived rather quickly. Tombstone isn't as tiny as you'd imagine, and we couldn't quite remember where we had parked at. As I am trying to figure out where we are, Green freaks the fuck out. Oh my god. What, dude? I can't, I'm not driving the car anymore. Dude, what the fuck are you talking about? I can't move. As if it couldn't get any more frightening, I realized in the middle of Green's outburst that we had inadvertently ended up at the parking lot we'd left. Alright, I'm always trying to think logically, so I deduced the following. At this point, two things are possible. One, Green is possessed by a butthurt ghost who basically told me to check my living privilege. Two, Green is experiencing a psychotic breakdown. Either one of these is a threat to our safety at this point, so I started telling him simple commands. If he was possessed or simply psychotic, simple instructions were the best course of action. Green, stop the car. Green, stop the car, I ordered in a commanding voice. Eventually, logic and reason fought off whatever had possessed him and he pulled over. I switched seats with him and began driving. Right after I took over driving, Jackson called and let us know they were safe and about 10 miles down the road towards base. Green was still in a trance, but once we got about a quarter mile from ground zero, whatever triggered him without warning originally had left. This leads me to believe that if ghosts are real, they have the effective possession range of about a quarter mile. Throughout the ride, we struggled to comprehend what had happened that night. Green told me that he could tell the ghost wanted me and that it was telling him to drive down an alley, but that he came to his senses in time. He said it wanted me bad and it wanted him to kill me. It probably would have had him attack me before we left, but our premeditated escape took it by surprise, so it stalled Jackson's car to lure us back. I asked him why it didn't just kill me itself, and he told me, probably because I'm bigger than you and more emotional. You think very logically, and you're a lot harder for a spirit to manipulate. Plus, I was in control of the car. This made sense and was pretty chilling to think about. If the spirit had succeeded, it would have simply hit the news as soldier murders other soldier in Tombstone, PTSD suspected. I imagine that's the case when you hear about mothers spontaneously drowning their children in a bathtub or other inexplicable murder-suicides. It's probably a ghost or spirit, but gets blamed on psychosis. About halfway back to base, we stopped at a gas station. Green, still not completely in his right mind, opened the hatch of the SUV, took out a sunshade that came with his car, and threw it in a dumpster. What did you do that for? I don't know. I just felt evil. Really evil, he answered. That was the final straw on how real this was. It really drove in how much this was probably not an elaborate prank. Why would he go to the extent of throwing away an expensive OEM part of his car to freak me out when I was already emotionally exhausted? To this day, I am still an atheist, but I do wonder about the paranormal, as it could very well be science not yet discovered. I would imagine that communicating with a spirit is the equivalent of trying to talk to an invisible man in the room who cannot touch anything. His only way of communicating is holding a portable fan and blowing paper suspended by a string from the ceiling. He blows it right for yes and left for no. I imagine this is why they communicate in such slow and brief answers. I did a little more research on the location and posted a map and pictures for you guys. Here is a map showing key points of interest. And here is the street view of the parking lot we were in. I'll also include these pictures in the description for you to look at. Ironically, we were in the parking lot for the OK Corral, the famous haunted location where the outlaws had their shootout in the 1800s. From what I can gather, the gunfight happened well after 1867, but keep in mind we talked to two separate spirits. I can't help but wonder if the second one was one of them. Also, I have heard of the ideomotor effect. So if you would like to help me come up with a logical explanation for what happened, keep in mind I'm aware of that, and it does not explain the light flickering and the console moving. I am also aware of Occam's razor and would welcome a shave at this point, as I think it would save my sanity. So, please convince me I'm crazy. Number 2. Alright guys, I'm that asshole. You know, that asshole who moves the pointer while playing with a Ouija board. I don't know why, I guess I just liked knowing I was the one responsible for scaring the shit out of people instead of something or someone I couldn't see. Or maybe I just didn't believe that a commercially made product could talk to ghosts. Who knows, but I found out karma definitely is a bitch. One night in college, a friend of mine was over and we were studying. One of those ghost shows came on the TV and they were messing around with a Ouija board. My friend, Liz, said offhandedly to me, "You know, I've never played with one of those." I was definitely surprised. Ouija boards were such a staple of my childhood. Hundreds of sleepovers, with me scaring the crap out of my friends by moving the pointer on the board and that whole light as a feather, stiff as a board thing. I couldn't fathom someone growing up and not experiencing it. I started talking about random experiences I've had with the board and tried to convince her it would be a good idea to run out to the Walmart and buy one. Finally, I was successful, and off we went, our studies abandoned on the table. College priorities at its finest, I guess. After our Walmart trip, we got back to my apartment and opened the box. We spared no expense. It was the glow-in-the-dark special edition. Talk about class. Liz looked like she was about to piss her pants as I explained how to put your fingers on the pointer. We lit some candles and turned off all the lights. "Okay, so just ask whatever," I said, secretly smirking. "Like what?" she asked. "I don't know, something fun, like when am I going to die or something." This was always one of my favorite questions for people to ask because while pushing the pointer, I could really freak them out. "I don't want to know that." Damn. I was a bit disappointed, but went with it. I suggested just trying to open our minds and see who would come through. I was already planning to have JFK come through. Not many of my friends know I am a huge JFK fan, so I can usually creep them out with the amount of knowledge the ghost of JFK knows about his assassination and whatnot. We put our fingers on the pointer and nothing happened. I was letting the tension grow before I started my pushing. It's always better to start slow. All of a sudden, the pointer started to move, and I wasn't pushing it for once. "You can't push it," I yelled at her. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. I didn't want her to ruin my plan. "I'm not," Liz shouted back. "Well, obviously you are, 'cause I'm not." "Aren't the ghosts supposed to move it?" she asked. I guess she got me there. I just sat back, shut up, and watched the pointer move. I was convinced she was moving it. She had to be. There was no way a ghost was communicating with us through a glow-in-the-dark spirit board that I bought for $17.99 at Walmart. After a few minutes, we finally got a message. IMISSULIZ. I miss you, Liz. Liz was understandably a bit freaked out that the spirit knew her name. I was too, but I kept telling myself she was moving it, whether it would be subconsciously or not. We kept going. "I need to see you again soon," it spelled out. "I need to see you again soon? What does that mean?" Liz asked, getting more and more freaked out. I don't know," I said, and honestly meant what I said. I had no idea what was going on. I hate to admit it, but I was starting to get freaked out. The Ouija board never worked for me before. "You're moving it," she yelled. "No, I'm not, I swear." And I did swear. I wasn't moving it for once in my life. "Yes, you are." She kept insisting I was moving it, but we kept going. The pointer stopped moving for a few minutes. I was intrigued, yet scared. I wanted to see what else it would do, but I was afraid of what I might find out. Finally, getting a bit impatient, I asked the first question of the night. "Who is this? What do you want?" "I am Will." "Hello? Liz, I still love you." Liz looked like she was going to lose her dinner all over the board. "Who's Will?" I asked. "Seriously, are you moving it?" Liz responded in a thin whisper. "No, I told you I wasn't. Who's Will?" "He's, my ex-boyfriend who killed himself after we broke up." "Really? Are you moving it? 'Cause this isn't funny." I tried to convince her that I wasn't, but she didn't believe me. She just sat there looking like, excuse the pun, she had just seen a ghost. I suggested that we quit. Listen, Liz. Obviously this is upsetting you. Let's just stop now and— No, I need to know if he's okay, she said with a determined look on her face. But I have to make sure it's not just you pushing it and fucking with me. After a bit of discussion, we decided that I would keep my fingers on the pointer but keep my head down and not look. That way, I wouldn't know where to push it. I agreed and sat there, feeling more and more uneasy. I put my head down and closed my eyes, trying to focus all of my energy, or whatever the hell ghost will needed to maybe bring some closure to Liz. After about a minute of sitting there with my head down and eyes closed, I started to go cold all over. It was unlike any other feeling of cold I have ever had. The only way I can describe it is that my bones were cold and it was chilling me from the inside out. I tried to brush it off. Maybe there was a draft coming in from the cool spring air outside. Then, without warning, my head, for lack of better term, exploded with all of these gruesome images I couldn't control. It was as if any single irrational or rational fear that I had throughout the course of my life multiplied its intensity by 1,000 and slammed into my brain at the same time. It only seemed to last for a second and a year at the same time, but regardless of however long it was, every single image was burned into my head. I jerked away from the table, trying not to scream. "What's wrong?" Liz asked, smiling at me. What the fuck was she smiling about? Why are you smiling? What the fuck is so funny? I could barely contain myself. Deep down, I knew I was acting crazy, but I couldn't help it. Nothing's funny. I'm just smiling because I had the nicest conversation with Will. He doesn't blame me. What the hell do you mean? I snapped again. It's only been like a fucking minute since we started. Liz's face scrunched up in confusion. What do you mean? I've been talking to Will for the last 2 hours. What the fuck? Needless to say, I was a bit creeped out. Okay, more than creeped out. I was terrified. I threw that damn board back in the box as quick as I could and blew out all of the candles. I shoved the box into the closet as far back as it could go. I didn't want to look at it anymore. I announced abruptly that I was going to drive Liz home and opened the door, trying to hurry her. It was definitely out of character. She obliged, however, and we got into the car. The whole 5-minute drive seemed like an eternity. I could swear I'd see things on the side of the road, but at second glance, they weren't there. Images I had seen of my babysitter mutilated and whatnot from that weird trance-like dream I had started to shimmer in the corner of my eyes. I swerved about 1,000,000 times thinking I was going to hit one of these things, but nothing was there. By the time we got to her apartment, Liz looked at me like I was crazy or something. Are you sure you're okay? She asked. Yeah, just get out of the damn car already, I snapped back at her, almost surprising myself with how mean I was being. Though I fully admit to fucking with people while using Ouija boards, I really am a nice person, I swear. Liz did as I asked and I sped away, eager to get to the safety of my apartment. When I opened the door, I noticed 2 things right away. It was about 30 degrees in the apartment and all of the blinds and curtains were wide open. I was confused, but I tried not to let my mind wander. I shut all of the curtains and cranked the heat. It was April, so it wasn't freezing outside, but it wasn't exactly hot either. Normal springtime weather. After shutting all of the blinds and whatnot, I sat on the couch and tried to turn on the lamp. The light went on and then popped off. I again tried to shake it off as a shitty coincidence. I changed the light bulb but went to turn it on again. Pop. Out again. I then went to go turn on the overhead light instead. Pop. All 3 bulbs popped off at the same time. At about this point, I was basically pissing my pants. I was so scared, but I tried to remain as calm as I could. It wasn't easy, let me tell you. I grabbed as many blankets as I could and sat on the couch in the now dark living room. I was going to light the candles we had used when we used the board, but I didn't want anything related to that fucking thing around me. I turned on the television and blared it, hoping that I could just attribute any noise and flash of something in the corner of my eyes to the television. Come on, you know you've done that too. Unfortunately, it didn't work. I was just starting to doze off when this loud beeping woke me up. It sounded like the worst alarm clock ever. It was coming from the closet where I had thrown the Ouija board. I slowly went over and opened the door. Out fell an alarm clock, an old one that I used to have. I think it was my roommate's. I hope it was my roommate's, blaring uncontrollably. I hurriedly shut the door so the Ouija board would stay in there, and I started looking at the clock to turn it off. Not only were there no batteries in it, nor was it plugged in anywhere, but the time flashing on the clock was 4:16 a.m. My birthday. What the actual fuck, okay? Needless to say, I threw that thing quite far and it broke into a million pieces. I wish it stopped there, I really do, but little did I know that was just the warm-up, so to say, the opening act to a shit show that has become my life. I hope this is enough to convince everyone never ever, ever to fuck with a Ouija board. Number 3. Well, for starters, I want to say that I don't really believe in all this stuff. It is hard for me to describe, mainly because I like to think something psychological happened rather than paranormal, but I guess I leave that for the readers to decide. Also, I'm sorry if this story is a bit long. It took place over a week or two in the summer of 2011, and I want to cover as much of it as I can. It was the summer after my first year of college, and things were going well for me. I'd been dating this girl for over a year. We'll call her Stacy, and school was good. Anyway, I'd be hanging out at this local coffee shop with some of her friends. We'll call them Emma and Helen. We were bored and not much had happened that summer, and we needed a change of pace. We'd been talking about the paranormal over our coffee, and Emma mentioned that she had a Ouija board from forever ago that we could try out. I laughed at the idea, mainly because I don't believe in that sort of thing, but I've always thought ghost stuff was kind of fun, I guess. Emma runs home while Helen, Stacy, and I head to a nearby park to pick out a spot. Night had fallen, and it got pretty dark. When Emma showed up, we decided to use the nearby basketball court as our place to play the game. I sat out the first round or two. Emma, Stacy, and Helen began to ask questions. Helen, being the voice of the matter, asked, "Is there any spirit out there that wants to speak to us?" Nothing. Bummer, right? I laughed a bit at the whole situation, but then she asked again. We waited. Nothing. Of course. Then Emma gave it a shot. "Is there a spirit out there that wants to communicate?" Boom. The little triangle shoots over to yes. I immediately call out Helen as moving the piece, but she swore up and down it wasn't her. Anyway, Emma was talking to this spirit for a little while. It was a boy who slowly got more violent and more violent. The conversation got dark quick. I don't remember the details, but Helen ended that shit before it took off. I was intrigued for some reason, but I kept calling out Helen, as I know she liked drama, for moving the piece, and she told me to go ahead and take her place. I sit down on the basketball court and think this is just absolutely stupid. I decided I was going to make a joke out of it, and being a big James Dean fan, I asked, "Can I speak to James Dean, the actor?" No response. I tried again. Nothing. Then on the third try I said, "Is there anything that wants to speak to me?" Boom. The triangle shoots to yes. It wasn't slow like before when Helen was playing. The thing moved so fast my hands were pretty much knocked off. I looked to Emma and Stacy, and both of them were pale as ghosts. No pun intended. I asked them what was up, and they said it wasn't them moving it. Being skeptical, I asked the thing's name. It spelt out C-A-U-S. Cause? I asked. Yes. So I began to talk to this spirit named Kaz and asked him to describe himself. He said he was blonde, blue-eyed, and burned. All of which I thought was a weird description, and when I asked what he meant by burned, he said, F-I-R-E. Fire? I asked. Did you die in a fire? There was some hesitation. I thought I hit the wrong nerve or something with this spirit. It was a long pause, and then, yes. I asked what year, and it said 1816, 1816. Okay, so at this point I just started talking to Kaz like an old chum or something. I began to ask what about his family life and things like that. While I didn't believe it, I still was having some fun. I asked him if he could visit me because I thought he was an alright guy. Kaz said D-R-E-A-M-S. Dreams. I said, sure, visit me in my dreams. That'd be alright. I ended the conversation not long after that, mainly because it was getting late and the wind really started picking up. Stacy drove us there, so I jump in her car and she puts on her iPod before taking me home. Really odd thing. Loud, deafening static filled the car. There was a voice, not singing, but rather talking as we both fumbled to either turn off the radio or unplug the iPod. We struggled with the iPod, so I just shut the radio off and we sat and stared at each other. We didn't need to say anything. We were both pretty creeped out, but I figured, hey, Kaz seemed alright. I get home a little after midnight and go to bed. That night, I had a dream that I went into my bank to make a deposit. I walked up to the counter and placed the check in front of the teller, who was about my age. He was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy. Nothing out of the ordinary. I asked him to cash the check and he just opened the drawer and emptied all the money out, sliding it over to me. I asked him if he's sure and he gave me a wink. He wouldn't speak to me. And then I woke up. I go to the same coffee shop the next day, not really thinking anything out of the ordinary, and Emma starts talking about how she wants to do the Ouija board again. I'm down this time, no questions asked. Any weird dreams? Emma asked me. Nothing too odd. I had a dream I was at the bank and this blonde guy gave me the whole drawer. A blonde guy? Yeah. Then I got to what she was getting at. She was implying that the blonde guy in my dream was Kaz. Could be. I didn't know him. So we go to the park, this time setting it up at one of the pavilions. I cut Helen out of the game right off the bat and began by asking to speak to Kaz. The game piece moved quickly to yes again, and I asked him if he was the one in my dream. Yes. Odd, but whatever. I begin to ask some more questions about his family and all sorts of stuff, but this time he is a bit more standoffish. I got a lot of no's when asking about his siblings, something he said he had, and his parents. He told me he didn't have parents, and I said that was impossible. Did he just not know them? He said N-O-P-A-R-E-N-T-S, no parents, followed by other. So I asked what he means by other, and he said no, P-E-R-S-O-N, and I asked to clarify if he was in fact a person. No. I asked him again, so if you're not a person, what are you? C-A-U-S. Stacy got freaked. She was fairly religious and wanted to end the game. I agreed. I was getting the creeps and went ahead and ended it. I told Helen to try and talk to someone. I was going to have a smoke and watch. Stacy was done and Emma wanted to keep playing. Helen starts trying to talk to someone, but she just keeps getting yes, followed by C-A-U-S, and then nothing after that. I told her to quit fucking around, but she was serious. I could tell that she wasn't lying to me, mainly because she wanted to get the fuck out of there as fast as possible. We pick the board up and go home. I had an uneasy feeling that night, like someone was watching me, but I figured I just had the creeps. Anyway, I got home a little after midnight again and went to bed. I had another dream. I woke up in the middle of the night to my dog scratching at my door. She sounded panicked. I sit up and can see her shadow under the crack in my door and a red or orange light around it. I jumped up quickly and opened the door. My dog shot out into my room and I stepped out and saw my house burning down around me. The place was engulfed in flames, and the center of my living room was the blonde bank teller, smiling at me. He just had this really creepy smile. His eyes were wide open and he said, C-A-U-S. He just kept repeating it over and over, and then I woke up. I took a break from the board after that. I was busy with other things. I'd been running around the city for a bit, but every night I got home I had the same dream every night. Nothing different, just the same dream. Odd. So I go back to the coffee shop later that week and Emma points out that I look tired. I explain my dream and her face just drops. She said that she'd been doing some reading about Ouija boards and the #1 rule is to never ask for anything instead of a spirit, something I did, or to invite whatever you're speaking to out of the board, something I also did. Fuck. I figure the best way to end this thing is to put an end to Cause and have one final conversation telling him to go away. We go to the park, the same group as before with me, plus my good buddy Sam Watson, not his real name, who just didn't believe me. Sam was always like that, but I told him I wasn't fucking around this time. Something weird was going on. Anyway, we're sitting around playing the game under the pavilion again. I try and talk to Cause and it took a few tries, but he shows up. I ask him if he's evil. No. I ask him if he's good. No. I ask him if he's a spirit. No. I ask him if he's a demon. Yes. So, I don't fuck around with demons, alright? I'm not religious or anything at all, but I grew up Catholic, and the #1 thing I always told myself is that if I were to find out that heaven and hell existed, it wouldn't be because I found a demon. So, I get paranoid, like, really paranoid. I start having a panic attack of some sort, which happens to me from time to time, and I ask to end the game. No. I told him to stop showing up in my dreams. No. I end the conversation anyway and call the local psychic. Odd, I know, we have a local psychic. Well, I start to explain the story and she told me not to come over to her place. She believes every word I'm telling her and that she can't help me. When I beg her to tell me what to do, she says that she'd help me for a sum of money I couldn't afford. Either she really didn't want me to show up around her, or she thought she'd get some easy money from a broke college kid. Either way, I was shit out of luck. So I tell the group what she told me, and before I can finish there is this creepy, animalistic laugh from the darkness. Everybody jumps, even Watson. It got cold, too. I remember I was wearing this leather jacket I picked up in Europe and I was still ice cold. We decided to roll out. The next few days went by slow, mainly because I couldn't sleep, not at all. I would get the feeling that I was being watched, wake up in the middle of the night with cold sweats, have the dream that the blonde kid was smiling at me. Sometimes I'd feel like someone would shake me awake. My friends wanted to play the game some more, minus Stacy, and I refused. If this was real, I was in enough shit as it is. I turned to the only person I knew that could help. My father. My dad isn't really a religious man at all, but he did make me go to church as a child. His father was super Catholic, so I think that instilled something in him. I don't know. Anyway, I tell him the story and he thinks it sounds ridiculous. I feel that way telling it now, to be honest. He explains that it is all in my head and that if I realize that, the dreams will stop and I'll be able to sleep again. I took it to heart and thought that maybe all the answers were made up by my unconscious mind, which is a common theory with Ouija boards. Things simmered down after that. I told my friends what my dad said, but not all of them believed it. Mainly because they started having similar dreams of the blonde guy. I figured it was all just psychological. So we stopped playing with the board because school was coming up in a month or so and life just got in the way, but we never revisited it. Mainly because every time they tried and I wasn't around, the board would just remain dead. Emma thought that Kaz took control of the board and that he was the overall dominant entity that took over when I called him out. I brushed it off. However, it is hard for me to brush off completely because I still have dreams from time to time about the blonde guy. I guess I should just call him Kaz, because that's what I associate him with anyway. I no longer feel alone when I'm alone, and this was years ago. Whenever I get depressed or angry, I wonder if it is Kaz or if I'm just finding excuses. Stacy still refuses to go anywhere near Ouija boards after that, even though I told her it was just a game. She really doesn't think so. I just can't wrap my head around the whole thing. I'd like to think my dad was right. However, part of me still thinks that Kaz is real and he wants me to talk to him again because from time to time I think about getting another board and asking how he's doing. I want to start off by saying these stories may not be the kind of scary stories where you feel like you're going to be murdered or anything, but it's definitely creepy knowing any of these things can happen to the average person. Even you. Let's begin. When I was a teenager, my mom was having a hard time raising 2 children as a single mother. She wasn't working, but my brother was still a baby and he was keeping her up all through the night and was very colicky and always screaming. While I was staying with my grandmother, she went to get groceries at the store. She came back ecstatic for the first time in quite a long time. She said that she met a great upstanding Christian man who gave her $100, claiming that he felt it was called upon him by God to give her the money. He got her all flustered and blushy by complimenting her jacket. She thought this was great because she was really into the biker kind of look. She was so happy to meet such a nice guy. They exchanged numbers and agreed to meet up later for a movie. The guy stopped by and I didn't like him. Something about him just threw me off. I didn't know if it was just me, but he made me overly suspicious. My grandmother taunted him about his beliefs, basically told him that he was full of shit. She was very blunt like that. My mom brushed it off and nodded at everything he said, debating a little bit here and there, but mostly just trying to have fun. My mom went to the movies with the guy and said that it was okay, but kind of awkward because the movie wasn't really her style. She said that she was going to have a few drinks with him at his house and would be back later on that same night. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach, as along with my grandma. I believed this guy was full of shit and was using being a man of God to disguise something worse. He made me really uncomfortable and was overly friendly. Not in a perverse way, but just in a creepy way. My mom came back a few hours later really freaked out. She said that when she got to the guy's house, he had a weird collection of women's leather jackets. Now, my mom loved leather jackets, but was a bit creeped out, so she asked him why he had so many. He claimed women would just leave them there and she could take any one of them she wanted. She was already wearing one. She politely declined, and I believe she said it was when he told her that he would go make her a drink in the kitchen. She jumped out the bathroom window and took off. We thought it would be over by then, but it wasn't. For weeks, he harassed her, leaving morbid and terrifying messages on her door and the car. He wrote threatening letters with crazy handwriting stating that she would be sent to hell and something else about being a vampire. Her or him, I can't remember. There was a lot of stuff about blood. She went to the police, and the police said there wasn't anything they could do about the letter and didn't take it very seriously. She was terrified for weeks and eventually took off to another state for a little bit. We never saw him again, thankfully. When I was in 6th grade, I went through a very hard time with severe bullying. I was pretty quiet and shy. One weekend, my parents dragged me along to a graduation party for a family friend of theirs whose son was graduating high school. Since I had been going through a hard time at school, I kept to myself mostly, but I loved art and always carried a sketch pad with me drawing whenever I got the chance. About an hour into the party, the host and my mom came over to where I was sketching and told me they wanted to introduce me to someone who was also an artist. His name was David. He was incredibly nice and had a digital drawing pad which I hadn't really seen before. I was really interested in his digital equipment and he showed me a bunch of artwork he had done. I was so intrigued I hung out with him until my parents were ready to leave. He told me that he volunteered at a free after-school clinic for children whose parents worked and needed a place to go. He said he ran a drawing class there, and if I ever wanted to come and hang out with him, I was welcome to. I went to his class several times, but as I got busier with school, I was unable to go, and we sort of lost contact. Fast forward a few years. I am now in 11th grade. David sent me a friend request on Facebook asking me how I had been and what I was up to these days. We caught up a little bit and planned to meet up with each other at a local cafe, sketch, talk, and have some coffee. I had moved to a different school at this point. I didn't really like most of the kids in my grade, so it was nice to have someone to talk to who shared my love of art and wasn't completely an immature 16-year-old. We exchanged numbers and planned to make meeting at the cafe a weekly thing. Gradually, we hung out more and more, going other places and hanging out at each other's houses. My parents were fine with this since they considered him a family friend and he was always welcomed into our house. That's when things started to get a little strange. He made an offhand comment one night about how he wished I was 18 and single. I was seeing someone at the time. I tried to make it clear I wasn't interested in a relationship but really enjoyed his company as a friend. One evening when we were hanging out, he told me he was going to download a, quote, cool app for my phone. Not thinking much about it, I gave him my phone and let him set it up. He explained to me that it would alert you if you were within a close range of someone who also had the app and who was on your friends list. I trusted him and didn't look at it very closely. Around this point, too, I had found out that he had texted my mom and told her a few things I had told him in confidence. I was very upset and felt like he had betrayed some of my trust. A few days later, he texted me asking why I was in a certain area of town. I was out running errands with my mom and didn't really think much about it, thinking maybe she told them that we were going there. A few days later, after my dad and I were taking my boyfriend home around 11 p.m. after having a small get-together at my house, David texted me the next morning asking if I had left my house at 11:05. Which is the exact time, I kid you not, the previous evening. I was creeped out by this and started looking at the app he had downloaded onto my phone. For those of you who wanted to know what the app was called, it's called Find Friends, no spaces. It was a little bit more than what he had originally told me. Not only did it alert you when you were close to another friend with the app, it showed your GPS location down to a general location of where you were. You could also set your friend's home and have it alert you anytime they left that location. When I found out all this information, I was so creeped out and deleted the app immediately. He then texted me to ask why I had gotten rid of it. I lied and said it was because none of my other friends used it and I didn't really like it. Not long after this, I was home alone and my mom had forgotten her cell phone on our counter when she had gone out shopping. And David had texted her a bunch of times. I opened the phone and read the text. He basically said I had told him some stuff about my boyfriend. None of what he said was true. It was 100% made up. and he said he was worried for me being in such an unhealthy relationship. That was the last straw. Not only was he being a creeper, but he was lying to my mom, trying to get her to break me and my boyfriend up so he could have a chance with me. I flipped shit on him and told him he could never contact me again. After I cut off communication with him, I found out he was 32, and I was 16 at the time. I told my mom, and to this day she still says that I overreacted and remains on friendly terms with David. A few months ago, he contacted me saying he was sorry for whatever he did to offend me and that he was now living in California. If I ever wanted to come stay with him, he would be more than happy to have me. I told him to go fuck himself. If you stuck around for that whole story, thank you. Retelling it was therapeutic for me. I know I was very naive, but I have learned a lot from this experience. This happened to me in 2008, when I was living with my boyfriend, now husband, in Boston. When the economy tanked, I was one of the folks that got laid off, so I was spending a lot of time at home alone during the day. At one point, I remember my boyfriend telling me that a couple guys had been reported in the neighborhood posing as utilities workers. They'd apparently knock on residents' doors saying that they needed to be let in to read the meter or whatever. And while one kept the occupant distracted, the other would rob the place. I didn't think much of it. It was Boston after all, stuff happens. One afternoon while my boyfriend was at work, someone knocked on my door. Looking back, I really shouldn't have opened it, but I did. A guy stood there in jeans, a tank top, and an orange reflective vest. "I'm from the gas company," he said. "I need to come in and read your meter in the basement." For some reason, I thought of the story that my boyfriend had told me weeks earlier. Alarm bells began to go off. I looked at him more closely. The car he had parked in front of my house was a white, unmarked sedan. I didn't see any clipboard in his hands. He hadn't even said which gas company he was from. Did we even have a meter in the basement? I didn't know. We rented and the basement was full of spiders. I never went down there. "Can you hold on? Just a second," I asked. "Sure." I closed the door, locked it, and called my boyfriend, telling him what was going on. "I'm calling the cops," I told him. "Do it," he replied. Dispatch told me that they'd send an officer. All of this had only taken a minute, but when I looked out the window, the gas man had disappeared from my porch. The white sedan was nowhere to be seen either. I stepped outside to wait for the police. A police cruiser eventually rolled up. I waved, but it drove slowly past me and kept going. My heart sank as I watched it disappear around the corner. I was still shaking my head when the gas man pulled up to the curb in his white car again. I should have booked it back inside immediately, but I was angry now and apparently an idiot. He leaned out the window. He looked furious. "You called the cops on me," he accused. "Hell yes," I shot back. "I don't know who the fuck you are." "Do you want me to go find the cop and talk to him?" I didn't care. I just wanted him gone, so I said yes. Then I had a moment of common sense and ran back inside, locking the door behind me as he drove off. I never saw him again, and until we moved out 2 years later, the gas company never sent anyone requesting access to our basement. To this day, I'm pretty sure he had absolutely no affiliation with any company and was posing as a guy reading meters to gain access to my house. Here's what scares me the most, though. The reports I had heard about this scam usually involved two men intent on robbery. Why was this guy trying to get inside alone? If he wanted to rob me, wouldn't he need his buddy to distract me? What exactly did he want this time? I don't want to know. I was maybe 11 or 12 at this time. My mother used to always send my little brother with me wherever I went to try and get him out of the house. We didn't always get along the best, but when we did, we usually had fun together. It was the middle of the summer and we decided we would walk to a shop to get a cold drink because it was really, really warm outside. The shop was literally a 10-minute walk, so my mother never minded us going. We were about halfway there when we noticed this old woman, maybe in her early 70s, shuffling across the footpath in an all-black gown. She had such a bleak, non-emotional face that was quite unsettling. I didn't take much more notice as we continued to walk, and that's when my little brother stupidly decided to shout across the road to her, "Hey, are you a witch?" I angrily hit him and said, "What the hell are you doing?" And then I looked across to try and apologize to the lady. She still had her back turned when I said, "Hey, I'm really sorry about that," still feeling annoyed at my brother's stupid actions, and left, red-faced. The woman said nothing as she slowly turned around to face us. My heart sunk into my chest as she gave me and my brother a really chilling and threatening look. She was then staring at my brother as if her eyes were peering into his soul. I don't know what it was, but something about the look she was giving us completely terrified me and my brother, who was also starting to shake at this point. The woman, still saying nothing, just continued to stand there staring with that horrible, creepy look on her face I won't ever be able to forget. I grabbed my brother's arm and walked on as he kept looking back and continued saying, "She's still looking, Alex. She's still looking." I could feel his arm shaking as we walked. We got to the shop and went inside towards the drinks. We both picked up a can of Coke, from what I remember, and walked towards the register. The line was slightly big, so the shop door was in sight. That's when my little brother spotted her. She was pacing up and down outside the shop, appearing to be mumbling words while she repeatedly looked into the shop, staring at us once again. My little brother had a fit and immediately started to cry. The fear was really hitting me now. My heart was beating faster than it ever had before. Clearly the woman had been angry about this stupid remark, but surely this was way too far. What did she want? I tried to calm my brother down and told him that we should walk down the aisles and wait a few minutes in the hopes that she would leave. But she didn't. She was now standing right at the door, making strange hand signals towards us and still muttering words. This was way too much for me. I ran to tell the manager of the store, who was quick to walk outside the shop and tell the woman to leave. Still scared, which the manager could easily notice as we both still shook there, kindly offered to walk us home. There was no sign of this woman on the way back. I only saw this woman once after, and it was while I was on the bus, and thankfully she never saw me. I never believed in witchcraft or that sort of thing, but nothing had scared me ever more than this. That look on her face. Those words she was muttering to herself. Was it a spell? It sounds stupid, but I'll be honest in saying I've always never had the best of luck. It's been 6 years since I last saw her on the bus. I haven't seen her since. I can only assume she is now dead. One thing is for certain, though. I'll never forget that horrifying look on her face, which has appeared in my nightmares many times. I want to start out by saying before this video begins, I'd like to say that this is a true story that happened to a girl named Alyssa. This video is made to scare you, but to also bring awareness to what you post online. That being said, let's begin. It was finals week of my first semester at Kent State University in 2011. Naturally, I was creeping on Twitter and doing everything I could to not study for exams. I clicked on a hashtag in a tweet I had posted earlier that day for no apparent reason and was shocked to see the exact text from my tweet posted from another account. The account had my picture and the name Lauren Ashley Cook. At first I thought my computer was switching names and images, that Twitter had a bug, or that I accidentally duplicated my account somehow. It never crossed my mind that someone had made the account with my image on purpose. I clicked on the profile, which had hundreds of tweets and a significant amount of followers. Looking through the account, I could see that all the tweets were copied from my account. The Twitter bio had a link to a Facebook account under the same name, also using my pictures and information. Things got even weirder when I saw that Lauren and her friends were posting on one another's walls. Her friends were using pictures of my friends. Not only did they talk to each other, but the conversations were identical to posts and comments my friend and I had left each other. I called my friends and told them about what I had found. 5 of us gathered around the computer and looked through all the different photos, statuses, and comments on the pages. Finals were the last thing on our minds at this point. Who would do something like that? And, oh my gosh, how does she know that inside joke? Were some of the questions flying around the room. My friends and I were all beyond creeped out. I decided to Google the name, Lauren Ashley Cook. Lauren Ashley Cook had multiple websites using my pictures, and she had created quite a life for herself. She was very social on Facebook and Twitter, but posted dark and depressing things on Tumblr. Lauren would post pictures of my ex-boyfriends and me and post about how much she hated them. Most of her posts were made-up scenarios or stories revolving around one of my photos. One post that stood out most to me was a blog entry about her deceased brother. Lauren posted a photo of an old friend and me. Underneath the photo, she wrote about how much she missed her older brother and how she would see him again one day. The boy in the photo is not my brother, and he is very much alive. Many of her posts revolved around depression and death. As if this wasn't alarming enough, I came across a blog under Lauren's name that had been active since 2007. I was only 14 when this started. How had I not known someone, somewhere, was taking my information and pictures for 5 years? To my knowledge, my social media accounts were private, and only people I approved can view my information. One name popped up on every website, talking to Lauren and comforting her when she was depressed. His name was Mike, and it was very obvious he and Lauren had feelings for each other. Although nervous about what his reaction would be, I reached out to him under my real name. I wrote him a very long Facebook message explaining that Lauren was not real and that someone was taking my pictures. At first, Mike thought I was impersonating Lauren and wanted me to prove I was real before talking to me. He asked me to take a photo holding a sign up that said, "Hi Mike." Once I did this, he messaged me things like, "I can't believe this," and "She lied to me." I told him I was so sorry that someone had done this to him, but I wanted to find out who was behind this and I needed his help. He started telling me all about Lauren. Lauren and Mike had been talking for a year online. "We say I love you to each other. She sends me pictures of herself all the time," he told me. My heart broke for him when I realized how hurt he was. Mike was in his early 20s and lived in New Jersey. He was in the process of launching his own clothing line and loved creating music. "What's Lauren like?" I asked him. He typed me long paragraphs describing Lauren with great detail. She is a freshman at Kent State. She graduated from Medina High School in 2011, and she worked at a nursing home for the last 2 years of high school. She loves ballet and has a little sister and a lot of dogs. As he rattled off more and more facts about Lauren, I realized just how much Lauren knew about me. I was a freshman at Kent State. I graduated from Medina High School in 2011, and I worked at a nursing home in high school. All the things she had told Mike about herself were actually facts about my life. I asked Mike if he could give me the number that she texted him from, and he did. As I typed the number into my phone, the name Creep popped up, and I instantly remembered who it was. Rewind 6 months earlier, it was June of 2011. My friend and I decided to go grab some late-night food when I received a text from an odd number. When I opened it, I was taken back to see it was a nude photo of a man in a mirror. Thinking it was someone playing a joke on me, I asked, "Who is this?" The number replied with, "It's your secret crush, gorgeous Alyssa. What are you doing right now?" I decided it was probably one of my goofy guy friends playing around. I ignored the text and put my phone away. The number kept texting me though. The person said things like, "What are you wearing right now?" and "I'd love to hear the noises you make." I kept ignoring them until I couldn't handle the messages anymore. I responded with only, "Leave me alone. If you don't, I will call the police." The person apologized and didn't send any more texts. I saved the number as Creep in my phone in case something ever came up, and that moment had now arrived. I decided to go to the police with a list of more than 20 websites using my pictures and information. I explained the creepy text that this person had been doing since 2007 and that I was genuinely worried about who this person might be. Why would this person send me a picture of a guy in the summer if he or she was pretending to be a girl named Lauren? Why had this person followed me for 5 years? I got goosebumps when I thought about someone I didn't know looking at my pictures and saving them to their own computer every day for so long. I became even more concerned when the officer said there was absolutely nothing anyone could do to stop this person or find out who he or she was. I was told that when it came down to it, I had allowed someone to access my pictures and it was not illegal for that person to take them. I could only pursue the stalker if he or she used my name or threatened me. It didn't matter that Lauren knew everything about me or how long she had been doing this. I was told to stay off the internet and forget about it. Needless to say, I was beyond disturbed and couldn't just forget about this. The websites were so well thought out and detailed, updated every day with new posts. The stalker had pictures from my MySpace account, which was deactivated years ago. I couldn't figure out who would have access to not only my pictures, but my friends' online accounts as well. My friends and I started going through our Facebook friends, picking out anyone who seemed fake. "I think I found the Facebook," one of my friends texted me. It was a profile named Lisa Jones. This person hadn't updated their Facebook in months, but was friends with more than 300 people from my high school. It didn't take long to figure out how she was gaining access to our information. Lisa Jones added hundreds of friends, including us, and we accepted since we had a ton of mutual friends. None of us even thought twice about it. She just logged in and went under the radar by not updating, only using the Facebook account to get our pictures and information. I broke down and decided to text the number myself. I started off with, "You know exactly who I am and I know what you're doing. Take the websites down." The stalker responded. The mood of the text changed from apologetic to angry. The stalker's identity constantly changed. First, the stalker said she was a 16-year-old girl, only to say later that she was a young mother. I was so confused and angry, but I couldn't help but feel sorry for this person. The stalker admitted that he or she had found me on MySpace years ago, then followed me from MySpace to Facebook to Twitter as I created my own accounts. Lauren also managed the 7 Facebook accounts of my friends, admitting that she would duplicate our conversations on their profiles. "You just have the perfect life," the stalker told me. I couldn't believe this person thought I had the perfect life and had been stalking me for 5 years. According to her, she came across my MySpace at random. "It's easier to talk to people using your pictures. I'm not happy with my life at all," Lauren texted me. Something in me felt sorry for this person, but I tried to stand my ground. She agreed to take the websites down, saying she knew it was a problem. "I know what I'm doing is wrong. I need to start focusing on myself," she told me. I was relieved, but I felt she agreed a little too quickly to mean what she said. She proved me right when she deleted the current websites, created new ones, and sent them to Mike, still pretending to be Lauren. She even told Mike that someone was stalking her after I texted her. She had no idea I had been in contact with him. Every time she created a new site, Mike would let me know. I would text her, she would delete the websites, then she would create new ones. It was a never-ending cycle. I was extremely frustrated and angry, but realized I couldn't stop this person from creating websites. The only thing I could do was stop the stalker from having access to my information from now on. I deleted hundreds of friends on Facebook, blocked people on Twitter, and monitored what I posted. After deleting Facebook friends, I received messages from Facebook accounts made hours earlier saying, "Can you please add me? I heard you're the girl that Lauren was pretending to be." I knew it was Lauren trying to gain access to my information again. This went on for weeks. I couldn't believe she wanted to access my information and pictures that badly. Lauren still creates blogs using my pictures. Most of the websites and Facebook accounts have been deactivated, but I'm unsure of how many websites she has that I haven't found. I try not to let it get under my skin. I've accepted that there is nothing I could do to stop her legally, but I want to be proactive. My goal is not to scare anyone out there of using social media, but to help other girls make positive changes in how they use social networks to better protect themselves. If I had known back in 2007 the huge impact social networking would have on our generation, I would have been more selective about adding friends or posting photos. My hope is other girls can read this story and learn from my mistakes. While the show Catfish is truly entertaining, it's a lot more fun to watch than it is to feel like you're living in an episode. Warning. If you have a heart condition, do not read this. You will drop to the floor flopping like a fish while clenching your heart, seeing as you just had a heart attack. Also, if you have a sensitive anus, do not listen to this. The brick you shat will be painful. Number 1. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park, quite a few ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance-walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer and closer until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped, dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smiles still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to see where he had been standing, to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him. And then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoed steps as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking at the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the f... Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go until he was far enough away to be almost out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time, he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the side of the road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high, he looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. Number 2. This happened when I was in college. One night, after having a few drinks, I came home to my small house where I lived with two other girls, probably around 2:30 a.m. We were all serious students. I was probably the least serious, actually, and when we partied, it was not your typical UCSB mega rager, more like a small get-together with friends. We would often have a few people spend the night, sleep on our furniture, and even in our beds, whatever the case may be. That night, my roommates had had a few people over who I didn't know, and I saw when I returned home that one of them had opted to sleep on the couch. I could tell from the shadow that I saw there. But as I was passing the couch to enter my bedroom, I noticed that the figure was lying very stiff. He just had this weird energy to him. He was lying down, but it was like he was putting all of his energy into lying as still and rigid as possible. I paused and the guy quickly jerked his head to face me without moving his limbs so quickly that it startled me. I could see his wide open eyes glinting in the dark. Figuring that I'd startled him or that he was drunk or maybe on some kind of stimulant and unable to sleep, I just hurried past into my bedroom and locked the door. The dude made me nervous and I wasn't taking any chances. I fell asleep. At 4:30 a.m. I woke up. There was a strange sound at the door, almost like somebody was drumming their fingers against the wood very quietly. I lay still and listened. There were more quiet sounds, like someone scratching the door with their fingers, which got louder and louder until it was clear that he was using both hands and scratching as fast and as hard as possible. It created an extremely loud and intimidating sound that filled me with fear. I got my cell phone and texted my roommate because I was afraid to make a sound. "Your friend is freaking me out. Is he coked out? Can you talk to him? He's banging and scratching on my door." She didn't text me back, probably because she was asleep. I texted my other roommate to the same effect, covering all my bases. Keep in mind that the scratching had been going on at this point for a couple minutes. I have no idea how he could have sustained it. Scratching a wooden door with your fingernails can't feel good. He also grabbed at the knob and jiggled it super forcefully. Because neither of them answered, I decided to call and really wake them up, though I was scared to make a sound. I know it sounds stupid, but there was something seriously horrifying about being teased like this through the door. I knew that he was trying to terrify me. I felt like a little kid, but I could tell this guy was fucked up or something and maybe the police needed to be called. And I wanted to loop my friends in since it was one of their friends. The scratching stopped abruptly and I called my roommate, who answered sleepily. "Yo, your friend is messed up. Can you please deal with it? Do we need to call the cops? He's seriously scaring me and he was scratching at my bedroom door. Really fucking weird." She didn't say anything for several seconds, and when she did speak, her voice had no sleepiness in it at all. "What friend?" she said. "That fucking guy that was sleeping on the couch," I said. She was quiet again. "We didn't have any guys over," she said. "Call the police." My adrenaline surged and I told her to please lock the bedroom door as quickly as possible. I realized that I hadn't heard scratching in a while and I had no clue where the dude had gone. Suddenly, I heard a loud banging in the other end of the house, where my roommates, Lauren and Monica, shared a bedroom. The bangs were followed by the sound of them screaming in fear. I quickly dialed the police as this maniac proceeded to bang against the, luckily, locked bedroom door of my two roommates as they screamed. The heaviness of the blows left no doubt that he was trying to break the door down. I'd told the 911 operator the situation and she dispatched 2 squad cars. The police in Isla Vista are generally used to peeling drunks off the sidewalk and breaking up brawling frat bros. This was really serious and strange, and I think the dispatcher got the sense from my tone at how terrified I was, and she stayed on the phone with me. At one point, the banging stopped and everyone was quiet for a while. I talked with the dispatcher and suddenly looked down to see that this guy had slipped his fingers through the 1-inch gap between my door and the floor and was just kind of wiggling them around, making this weird growling sound. I screamed and backed away, which is my biggest regret about this situation, since when I look back at it, it would have been so awesome to just stomp the shit out of those fingers and hear the guy howl in pain. When the cops rolled up, I heard running and the sound of our sliding glass door opening and closing, and then he was gone. The cops never caught him. He had broken in through our side door by jimmying the lock somehow. My door was covered in what turned out to be huge gauges he'd made with a pair of scissors, which he discarded on the ground before he left. What terrifies me most about this is that I walked right past him. I looked him right in the face. I realize now that he was not trying to sleep or on drugs, but was lying so stiff like that because he was hiding. He probably heard me open the door and freaked out because he hadn't realized there was another person living there and tried to blend into the couch in the darkness. Number 3. My sister and I recently stumbled across a memory during our weekly visits. We had just moved to a suburb, our first house in a decent but isolated part of town. She was 12 and I was 7. Mom let us take our white German Shepherd for a walk. I remember the sun was setting over the desert landscape, but we weren't worried. It was nice to be able to walk unsupervised down the street. We lavished in our freedom and took our time, letting Kodak sniff and investigate everything. We had just let him off the leash and were watching him chase a rabbit. I guess that's why we didn't hear the car pull up nor the huge man that was sneaking up behind us. Kodak was a ways off and suddenly he turned back and looked at us. And like a streak of white lightning, he raced back towards us. He flew. I'm for sure his feet touched the earth. He blasted past our waiting arms and landed on the man behind us. We turned and Kodak was latched on the man's arm. Kodak was a big dog with big teeth and was absolutely shredding this guy's arm. The man eventually got him off and Kodak took a stance between us and the man. We apologized to the creep, not realizing what danger we were in. The man offered a shaky smile and told us we were good kids and stumbled off to his car. I remember there being a length of rope on the ground, which now I assume he had been holding. We looked at Kodak. He was growling and continued to growl until we made it home and he escorted us into the house. My sister told me, "Don't tell Mom or they'll kill Kodak for biting someone." It was so naive, we thought we were protecting our pet, but in actuality he saved one or both of us from a terrible fate. Much later I learned that my hometown is an area heavy in sexual predators and violent criminals. Many of the surrounding communities had passed legislation that wouldn't allow them to live in their towns, so they lived in ours. No wonder our house was so cheap. Number 4. I'm 22 and this incident happened a year and a half ago. I had just moved into my first apartment and was going in the process of moving. The door that led into my apartment locks itself automatically when closed. So I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my boyfriend. I returned to my apartment and sat on the bed while opening the mail and talking to him on the phone. I dropped the phone on the floor and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person lying under my bed was lying still with his back towards me and his head to his chest, so I couldn't see his face. And he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone and said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just gonna take a shower and call you back." The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, and jumped out my window, as my apartment is on the first floor, and called the police. They told me to wait nearby, but to go to across the street and see if anyone comes out the door to the apartment complex. This was during summer and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my boyfriend and he came out to me just before the police. I gave them my keys and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin and tired-looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. The policeman that had stood beside me and comforted me while the police searched through my house, I was a mess, shivering and crying, told me that the man had stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept in my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital. My boyfriend moved in with me the very next day. Number 5. In the mid-80s, my mom was a cleaner in Australia. She would clean houses in suburban areas and would sometimes do houses in rural wine regions, as we lived near both. She would leave business cards at the local shops and got most of her business this way and some through referrals and word of mouth. One day she got a call from a lady who sounded like she was around 60, asking Mom to clean her old farmhouse. She made a lot of odd demands and my mom would usually meet clients before taking on new business. In this case, the lady did not want to meet my mom and said she would leave the keys under the front doormat. Mom agreed, mainly because the lady was quite obviously wealthy and was offering to pay my mom substantially more than she would reasonably expect. Mom went to the house on a Monday morning and said she already felt unnerved by the long driveway. The house was essentially in the middle of a very large and very empty property. She found the keys and started cleaning. About an hour into the clean, she hears the back door shut.